Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the really charged and complex issue of Alberta separatism. It's a movement that's putting a modern twist on a debate that's been simmering for decades, and frankly, it's raising some pretty big questions about the future of the province's place in Canada. And that really is the question at the heart of it all. Now, look, while outright independence might seem pretty unlikely, the push for it is kicking up some very real political and economic dust, and that's being felt all across North America. All right, so to really unpack all of this, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at what makes this whole independence question so unique. Then we'll dig into the government's playbook, a potential Indigenous veto, the huge economic gamble it represents, and finally, what Albertans themselves actually want. Okay, first things first. To really get a handle on this, you have to understand that Alberta separatism isn't just Quebec separatism with a cowboy hat. No, they are completely different animals. You see, with Quebec, the sovereignty movement has always been about protecting a distinct French-Canadian culture, its language, and a unique national identity. Alberta's movement, it's coming from a totally different place. It's driven almost entirely by economic and political frustrations, all wrapped up in this powerful feeling they call Western alienation. And this feeling, it's got a name: Western alienation. At its core, it's this deep-seated belief that the federal government and its policies, everything from carbon taxes to energy regulations, are designed to help central Canada, but at the direct expense of Alberta's economy. And that feeling, right there, is the engine driving this whole movement. So how exactly is the provincial government acting on this feeling of alienation? Well, they're not just talking about it. They're using a pretty controversial piece of legislation to challenge the federal government head-on. And this is it. Premier Danielle Smith's Sovereignty Within United Canada Act. It was passed back in late 2022, and its whole purpose is to give Alberta a formal, legal-ish tool to push back against federal laws and policies that it decides are harmful to the province. Now, the way this act is supposed to work is what makes it so fiery. It basically lays out this framework for the province to essentially just declare a federal law invalid within its own borders. And that final step, that's the real kicker. It gives the provincial cabinet the power to order its own agencies, like the police or health authorities, to just not enforce that federal law. It's a direct challenge to Ottawa, and yeah, a lot of legal experts are saying it's flat out unconstitutional. But even with this Sovereignty Act, there's a much bigger obstacle standing in the way of any real independence. And it's a huge one: the foundational treaties with Indigenous nations. This quote from Grand Chief Trevor McCree of Treaty 8 really sums it up perfectly. The argument is that their treaties were signed with the Crown, with Canada, a long time before Alberta was even a province. So Alberta can't just decide on its own to tear up that relationship. And this whole argument is rooted in 3 key treaties. We're talking about Treaties 6, 7, and 8, which together cover almost all of modern-day Alberta. And here's the crucial part: these aren't just old pieces of paper. They are constitutionally protected, legally binding agreements that form the very foundation of the province's existence. And you know what? The courts agree. In a landmark decision, a judge confirmed that these treaties are part of the Canadian Constitution, and that any move to separate without Indigenous consent would be a violation of the law. This, for all intents and purposes, creates what a lot of legal scholars call an effective Indigenous veto over separation. Okay, so setting aside the huge legal hurdles for a second, the economics of this whole thing, well, that's a whole other can of worms, just filled with massive risks. Just look at this number. Economists have run the models, and they project an immediate, jarring economic shock. You're talking about $20 billion in economic activity just gone, as the province would lose its spot inside the stable Canadian economy. That's almost $4,000 for every single person in Alberta. And the hits would just keep on coming. First off, an independent Alberta would get booted from major trade deals, like the one with the US and Mexico. Then there's the fact that it would become a landlocked nation, completely dependent on Canada for getting its oil to market. On top of that, it would have to create a brand new currency, a volatile petrodollar, and suddenly pay for everything the federal government handles now, from the military to border control. And believe me, this kind of instability does not go unnoticed. You see, credit rating agencies, the folks who decide how risky it is to lend a province money, are already a little nervous about Alberta's reliance on the roller coaster price of oil. And when you add the political chaos of a separation debate into that mix, well, that just makes it way more expensive to borrow money and really hurts your financial reputation on the world stage. All right, let's get to the final piece of the puzzle. And maybe the most important one. After all this back and forth, what do Albertans themselves actually want?
Well, despite all the political noise, the polls are actually surprisingly clear. A solid majority, we're talking 65% of Albertans, say they would vote to stay in Canada. Only about 29% would vote to leave, and it's interesting, most of those aren't even definite separatists.
But here's where it gets really complicated. Because if you look inside Alberta's governing party, the United Conservative Party, those numbers get turned completely on their head. A majority of UCP voters, 57%, actually say they support leaving Canada. This shows a massive split not just in the province, but right inside the ruling party itself. And just think about the day after a yes vote for a second. An incredible 3/4 of the people who want to stay in Canada say they wouldn't stick around in an independent Alberta. They'd move. That could hollow out the new nation's population and its tax base before it even gets off the ground. So, in the end, even if a referendum never happens, this whole debate has already changed Alberta. It's forcing a tough conversation about fairness, about autonomy, and about identity. So maybe the real question isn't whether Alberta will actually leave Canada. Maybe the real question is how this powerful, passionate movement is going to permanently reshape the province's relationship with the rest of the country for years to come.